My name is Margaret Avery, and the last thing I expected on that rainy Tuesday morning was a call from the man who handled my ex-husband's affairs. It had been 5 years since Richard and I signed those papers at the courthouse in Monroe County. 5 years since I walked out of that brick building with a single cardboard box and a half-beating heart. I had rebuilt myself since then, slowly, quietly, like someone learning to breathe through scar tissue. But that call, the one that began with Mrs. Avery, I'm sorry to inform you, it cracked something open I thought was sealed forever. Richard was gone. A sudden stroke, they said. No warning, no time for last words. For a man who had always been so careful, so planned, it felt strange that his end came without ceremony. The attorney, a polite young man with a voice that tried too hard to sound steady, said, I'd need to come by the office for the reading of the will. He also mentioned there were 2 of them. 2 wills, I asked, almost laughing. Yes, ma'am. One with your name and one with the name Linda Carver. The air left my lungs. Linda, my closest friend during the divorce, the one who brought casseroles and comfort when the rest of the world offered silence. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years. I hung up before my voice betrayed me. The next day, the rain hadn't stopped. Indiana has a way of holding on to storms like grudges. I made coffee strong and black and stared out the kitchen window at the empty bird feeder Richard once promised to refill. The house was small, paid off, and peaceful, the opposite of our old home on Lakeside Drive, where every argument echoed off high ceilings and cold tile floors. I had built this life from the ground up, new town, new job, new peace. And now, with a few words from a stranger, the past was clawing its way back. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I'd attend the funeral, listen to the lawyer, and return to my quiet life. But deep down, I knew nothing involving Richard ever stayed simple. He'd always been a man of control, the kind who left notes on the fridge, reminding me how to stack dishes properly. The thought of him leaving 2 wills felt deliberate, like he wanted one last word even from the grave. The funeral was set for Saturday at St. Luke's, the same church where we'd exchanged vows 33 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I almost didn't go. But our children, Michael and Anna, insisted. It's closure, Mom Anna said over the phone. Closure. Funny how people who've never been truly broken love that word. I arrived early, parked at the far edge of the lot, and watched the gray clouds drag across the steeple. The church smelled the same wood polish, old hymnals, and faint candle wax. Familiar faces nodded in my direction, but avoided conversation. In small towns, people remember divorces longer than marriages. I took a seat in the back pew and folded my hands. The casket sat near the altar, closed and heavy with the kind of silence that lingers long after the music ends. And then I saw her. Linda. She was sitting in the front row beside Richard's sister, wearing a dark blue dress and the pearl necklace I'd once helped her pick for her 50th birthday. My heart thudded. She looked composed, comfortable, even like she belonged there. During the service, she dabbed her eyes delicately, while the minister spoke about faithful friends who stood by him through hardship. Every word felt aimed like a quiet blade. When the service ended, people lined up to give condolences. Linda was the one shaking hands, thanking guests, guiding Richard's family through the crowd. I stayed seated, waiting until the room began to empty. Then, as she turned to leave, she spotted me. Her eyes widened for a moment, guilt, surprise, or maybe both, before she smiled that polite, practiced smile. "Margaret," she said softly, walking over. "It's been so long." Her voice still had that warm tone, the one that used to soothe me during sleepless nights. "I didn't expect to see you here." I wasn't sure I'd come, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I heard about the will. Her expression flickered, barely noticeable. Yes, she said, after a pause. Richard wanted things handled properly. He trusted his attorney to sort it all out. She placed a hand on my arm, light, rehearsed. I hope you find peace with all this. That word again. Peace. It sounded different, coming from her lips, hollow, almost mocking. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the church floor, echoing like punctuation marks to a story I thought had ended long ago. Outside, the sky finally broke. Rain poured in sheets as I stood under the awning, staring at the hearse pulling away. My son joined me, his hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. I nodded. But inside, I wasn't sure what I felt: anger, grief, or something deeper. I just knew one thing: if Richard left 2 wills, there was a reason. And if Linda Carver's name was on one of them, then the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night I couldn't sleep. The storm had moved on, but the sound of rain still echoed in my head. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I used to balance our checkbook and pretend the numbers added up to love. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my planner, circling Monday morning. The appointment with the lawyer. The day I would hear what Richard left behind and what he didn't. 5 years had passed since our divorce. 5 years since I thought I'd buried everything that once tied me to him. But the truth has a way of waiting. Sometimes it sits quietly in a locked drawer. Sometimes it wears your friend's perfume. Monday arrived with the kind of cold light that makes everything look honest, the kind that leaves no shadows to hide in. I drove to the attorney's office in downtown Bloomington, a small brick building wedged between a bakery and a pawn shop. The sign out front read, "Henderson and Tate Estate Law." I'd never been inside before, but I'd passed it 100 times on my way to the grocery store. Funny how a place can wait quietly in your world until the day it decides to change it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A young receptionist offered me a polite smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Avery, Mr. Henderson will be right with you." I nodded and took a seat near the window. The blinds were half closed, and light striped across the carpet in neat, narrow lines. I watched a leaf tumble down the street, outside brittle and yellow. Something that used to be alive now carried wherever the wind wanted. Mrs. Avery. A man in his 50s stepped out from an office down the hall. Gray suit, kind face, cautious tone. "I'm Tom Henderson. Please come in." His office was small shelves lined with leather-bound books that looked older than both of us. 2 envelopes sat on the desk, cream paper, thick, expensive. My stomach tightened when I saw them. They looked almost identical except for the faint handwriting in the corner. One read M. Avery, the other L. Carver. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting across from me. "I know this may be difficult." I folded my hands to keep them from shaking. "You said there were 2 wills." He nodded. "Yes. Mr. Avery drafted one shortly after the divorce, leaving the lake house and remaining assets to Ms. Carver. However, there's also a later version dated about 6 weeks before his passing. We're still verifying which one is legally binding." I stared at the envelopes. Why would he leave anything to her? Henderson hesitated. He didn't explain. But he wrote a note. "It's included in one of them." He glanced toward the phone on his desk, which began to ring. "Excuse me one moment," he said, stepping out to take the call. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. I looked at the 2 envelopes sitting side by side like 2 versions of my life, one I knew and one I didn't. The handwriting was nearly identical, just slightly slanted on one. My pulse quickened. I reached forward, tracing the name with my finger. Maybe it was nerves or maybe something deeper, but before I could think, I slipped one open. The paper inside was folded neatly, written in Richard's familiar handwriting. Linda, it began. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. He wrote about how much he trusted her, how she had been the only person who understood what I was trying to protect. He mentioned moving funds years ago, long before our divorce was final. I needed to be sure Margaret wouldn't undo everything. You've always known what's best for me. My hands trembled. I couldn't finish. The door opened again, and I quickly slid the paper back, folding it as neatly as I could. Henderson didn't seem to notice. Apologies for the interruption, he said. Now, where were we? I managed to nod. You said there was a later will. Yes. He opened a file. This second one leaves everything to you, Mrs. Avery. The house insurance and remaining accounts. Ms. Carver is listed only as a witness. I swallowed hard. The room tilted slightly. So, which one counts? We'll confirm soon, he said, but the later one appears valid. Mr. Avery's signature is dated and notarized. For now, we'll proceed with that understanding. I thanked him and stood my knees weak. As I reached for the door, he added quietly, I understand this might stir old feelings. If you'd like me to contact Ms. Carver on your behalf, I can... No, I said quickly. I'll handle her myself. Outside, the autumn wind hit my face sharp and cold. The town looked the same as always, cars parked crookedly along Main Street, someone sweeping leaves from the sidewalk, the smell of cinnamon from the bakery. But nothing felt normal anymore. I sat in my car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Linda. The nights she'd stayed over after the divorce, bringing red wine and stories about moving on. The time she said, some men just need a little peace to find themselves. Peace. Always that word. By the time I started the engine, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked like someone else's, a woman too tired to be angry, but too proud to be fooled again. I drove home, each streetlight flicking on as I passed. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I didn't turn on the lights right away. Instead, I stood by the window watching the rain begin again, small drops tracing lines down the glass. Somewhere out there, Linda was probably sipping tea, thinking this secret would stay buried with Richard. But secrets have their own way of surfacing, sometimes through paper, sometimes through memory. And tonight, I wasn't just a widow in name. I was a witness to a lie. When I got home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted under me. The two wills the letter meant for Linda, the way the lawyer's voice softened when he said her name. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was part of. I wanted to believe that it was some misunderstanding, that Richard hadn't really written those words. But I'd seen his handwriting too many times not to know the truth. I turned on the kitchen light, sat down, and opened my notebook. Old habits die hard. I still write things down when life feels too heavy. I made 2 columns, what I know and what I don't. Under the first, I wrote, he left 2 wills. He trusted Linda. He lied. Under the second, I left it blank. The questions were too big to fit on paper. The next morning, I drove to the lake house. I hadn't been there in years, not since I handed over the keys after the divorce. It sat near Lake Lemon, quiet, and still the kind of place where time moved slower. I parked by the mailbox and stared at the porch where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. Richard had loved this place more than anything, maybe even more than he'd loved me. I'd always thought he'd sell it after I left, but he hadn't. Now I knew why. The front door was locked, but I still had the old key. I stepped inside and was hit with the smell of cedar and dust. Everything looked the same, his fishing hat on the hook, the framed photo of him and our son by the fireplace. But it felt different, hollow, like a museum of memories that no longer belonged to anyone. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. The walls still held the faint shadow of our wedding photo. He must have taken it down, but the outline was there. Upstairs, I opened the closet and found boxes labeled in his handwriting, taxes 2010, car titles, house repairs. Richard had always been meticulous. If there were secrets, he would have kept them filed, labeled, and hidden in plain sight. In the study, a desk sat by the window overlooking the lake. I opened drawers one by one until I found something wedged beneath a stack of old envelopes, a small brass key taped to a note that read, "For safekeeping." My heart quickened. The key didn't fit any of the desk drawers, but when I glanced toward the corner of the room, I saw the old cedar chest he'd bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. The lock was small and rusted. I knelt down, slid the key in, and turned it. The lid creaked open. Inside were ledgers, receipts, and a single metal box with a latch. My fingers shook as I lifted it out. Inside the box were several papers, bank statements, handwritten notes, and one letter sealed with red wax. The envelope read, "Not yet sent." I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. "Margaret," it began. I sat back, the breath leaving my body. His words spilled across the page, messy and rushed as if written in one sitting. He admitted to hiding money years ago, moving it to an account under Linda's name to protect it from the divorce. He wrote about how ashamed he felt afterward, how he thought he'd make it right someday, but never found the courage. He confessed that Linda had helped him manage things, that she'd wanted to tell me the truth, but feared it would ruin everything. He ended the letter with a line that made my throat close. "You were always the steady one. I just didn't deserve your steadiness." I sat there for a long time reading those words over and over. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the apology. Outside, the lake rippled under the afternoon light, and for a moment I saw us there again, me, Richard, and the kids fishing on the dock, laughing over burnt marshmallows. It felt like a different lifetime. Maybe it was. By the time I drove back home, dusk had settled in. I didn't call the lawyer. I didn't call Linda. I just sat at my kitchen table and stared at the letter. There was a part of me that wanted to throw it away, to burn it and pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, the stronger one, knew I couldn't. I'd lived too long in silence, letting other people write the story of my life. This time I would be the one to finish it. That night, I placed the letter inside my old recipe box between the cards for apple pie and meatloaf. Somehow, it felt fitting, both things I'd perfected over years of learning when to stir and when to let things rest. Tomorrow, I told myself I would call Linda. Tomorrow, I'd let her know I had found the truth. But tonight, I allowed myself one moment of stillness, one breath of peace before the storm. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet leaves. Somewhere, a branch cracked. And in that sound, I heard the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sorrow, but clarity. Linda didn't answer the first time I called, or the second. On the third try, she picked up, her voice bright and strained, like she was pretending not to recognize the number. "Margaret. Oh my goodness, it's been so long, I was just thinking about you." I almost laughed. People always say that when they're caught off guard. "We need to talk," I said flatly. "About Richard. About the will." There was a pause, a soft click of her breath. "Oh, Margaret." I think it's best to let the lawyers handle that. I don't want to. Linda, I cut in. I read the letter. Silence. Then the sound of something being set down, maybe a coffee mug or a glass of wine. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, shaky. You weren't supposed to see that. No, I said I wasn't, but I did. She let out a sigh that trembled. It wasn't like you think. Richard was confused near the end. He asked me to help him, that's all. He wanted to protect you, he just didn't know how. Protect me, I said, my voice rising, by hiding money in your name, by making me feel like a fool while you sat next to him at church. Margaret, please. He didn't love me like that, she insisted. It wasn't an affair. It was complicated. I clenched the phone. Complicated, I repeated. That's what we're calling betrayal now. She started to cry. Or maybe she wanted me to think she was. I cared about you both, she whispered. I thought I was helping. You were so angry back then. I didn't want you to lose everything. Her words floated like dust, weightless and choking all at once. You already made sure I lost everything, I said softly, and hung up. I sat there for a long time staring at the phone. Outside, the wind rattled the trees. It wasn't rage that filled me. It was something quieter, colder. The kind of calm that comes when the worst has already happened. 2 days later, I met with Mr. Henderson again. He confirmed that the newer will was legally valid. Richard had signed it, witnessed by 2 people, one of them, ironically, Linda Carver. She was there when he made the change, he said, looking down at his notes. He must have trusted her deeply. I didn't reply. I didn't trust my voice. After the meeting, I walked downtown. The town square was decorated for fall pumpkins lined the courthouse steps, and a banner read, Harvest Fest Saturday. It was the kind of small-town warmth people move here for, but that day, it all looked like scenery for someone else's life. I stopped at the diner, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window. Richard's words kept echoing. You were always the steady one. I thought about how many times I'd been steady for him, for the kids, for everyone except myself. That steadiness had cost me years. I pulled out the letter again, reading it until the words blurred. There was one sentence I hadn't noticed before. If she ever finds out, tell her I meant well. Meant well? The phrase tasted bitter. That evening, I drove back to the lake house one last time. The sun was setting, turning the water gold. I walked to the dock and sat down, the wood cool beneath me. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke. For the first time in years, I let the memories play without pushing them away. Our wedding day, the kids splashing in the lake, the fights, the silence that followed. I thought of Linda, of how she'd sat beside me after the divorce, pouring coffee, saying, "You'll get through this." Maybe she believed it. Maybe she didn't. But now I saw her clearly, not as a villain, but as someone weak in the same way Richard had been. When I left the lake house, I locked the door behind me and slipped the key into my coat pocket. I didn't know what I'd do with the property yet, but I knew one thing: it wouldn't stay frozen in their story. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The anger didn't vanish, but it settled like silt after a storm. I dreamed of standing in the middle of the lake, the water calm around me, holding that letter, until the ink ran clean off the page. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds. My phone buzzed an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "Mrs. Avery," a voice said. "This is Ellen Cooper from the local paper. I understand you're the executor of Richard Avery's estate now. Would you like to make a statement about his passing?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled faintly. "No, ma'am," I said. Let him rest. The truth has already said enough. The following week, the lake house keys felt heavy in my purse. I carried them everywhere, not sure if I was supposed to let go or hold on. Every time I heard them clink against my phone, it felt like Richard whispering that one last unfinished sentence of his, "You were always the steady one." Maybe it wasn't meant to be praise. Maybe it was guilt. I decided to drive out there again just to see it in daylight. October sunlight in Indiana has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. The leaves had turned gold and orange, and the lake reflected it all like a mirror, trying to remember who it used to be. I parked by the gravel path and stood for a while listening to the quiet. Somewhere far across the water, someone was burning wood. The smoke drifted low, carrying the smell of cedar and damp leaves. Inside the house was colder than I remembered. I found myself running my hand along the kitchen counter, half expecting to hear Richard's voice telling me I'd left crumbs again. The refrigerator hummed faintly, still plugged in. On the counter sat a small ceramic jar, our old sugar jar, shaped like a hen. It had a hairline crack across the neck, the same one I'd glued years ago. That jar had survived every move, every fight, every morning coffee. I lifted the lid and stared inside. Empty, of course. I walked through the rooms slowly, almost reverently. Upstairs in what used to be our bedroom, sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors. I sat on the edge of the bed, noticing a small Bible on the nightstand. I opened it not for prayer, but because Richard always hid things in plain sight. Between the pages of Psalms was a folded receipt from 3 months ago. A jewelry store in town, paid in cash. I frowned. There was no mention of jewelry in his personal effects, nothing about a gift. For a second, my stomach turned cold. Then I flipped the receipt over and saw a note in his handwriting. For Anna, her birthday. Our daughter. I exhaled slowly, feeling foolish for assuming the worst again. Richard might have been many things, but he was still a father. As I set the Bible back, I noticed something else under the nightstand, a small photo frame face down on the floor. I picked it up and brushed off the dust. It was a picture of the 4 of us at Christmas 20 years ago. Me, Richard Michael, and Anna, all wearing matching sweaters Linda had knitted. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the corners with my thumb. The glass was cracked right across my face. I stayed there until the sun began to fade. Before leaving, I opened the window and let the air in. The house had been holding its breath too long. I wanted it to feel alive again, even just for a moment. On my way home, I stopped by the diner in town. I ordered soup and sat at the counter watching people come and go. A couple laughed in the booth behind me, sharing pie. A teenager filled napkin dispensers, humming softly. It all looked so ordinary. And for the first time, I wanted that kind of ordinary again. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw an envelope tucked under my front doormat. My name was written in blue ink, slanted careful. I knew the handwriting instantly. Linda. I stood on the porch for a long minute before opening it. Margaret. The letter began, "I owe you the truth." She wrote that Richard had confided in her years ago about the financial mess, how he'd panicked after losing a contract and moved money under her name temporarily. She said she hadn't asked for it, but didn't refuse either. She admitted they'd shared lonely dinners, but claimed nothing more happened. The money, she wrote, was still in an untouched account, and she was willing to sign it over. "I can't live with it anymore," she wrote. "He's gone, but the guilt isn't. I'm sorry for everything." I folded the letter slowly and set it on the table beside my purse. I didn't feel relief or anger, just a quiet tiredness that came from finally knowing. Maybe it was all true, maybe not. But the story had finally ended, And for once, I didn't need to add a final line. That night, I took the lake house keys from my purse and placed them on the counter. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I'd call the lawyer and make arrangements to transfer the title. The house wouldn't be a monument to betrayal anymore. It would become something else, something useful, maybe even good. As I turned off the lights, I looked at the window where the reflection of the porch light shimmered faintly. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see the past staring back at me. Just the woman I'd become older, steadier, and finally free. 2 weeks later, the lake house wasn't just mine on paper, it felt mine in spirit. The transfer was done, the documents signed. When the lawyer handed me the final envelope, I half expected another secret to fall out. But there was nothing left to uncover, only what to do next. I stood on the porch that morning watching fog drift across the lake. The air was crisp, clean, forgiving. The stillness felt different now, not empty, but open. I'd been waiting for closure, but what I really needed was purpose. That evening, I drove into town to meet the contractor who'd been helping me with repairs. His name was Earl Simmons, a local widower who'd built half the porches in Monroe County. "You plan to sell it?" he asked, glancing around the living room. "No," I said. "I plan to use it." He raised an eyebrow. "Use it how?" I looked out the window where the last bit of sunlight glinted off the water. "For women like me," I said quietly. "For anyone who's starting over." He nodded, slowly understanding. "Then we'll make it right again." Over the next few weeks, I cleaned, painted, and patched until the place no longer smelled of regret. The walls turned warm cream instead of gray. The windows opened easily now, and the kitchen filled with the scent of apple pies from the oven. Word spread fast in small towns. Soon women I'd never met stopped by just to talk. Widows, divorcees, grandmothers raising grandkids. They came with their stories, and I listened. We drank coffee on the porch where Richard and I once fought in silence. Now laughter echoed there instead. One afternoon, I saw Linda's car pull into the driveway. I knew it would happen eventually. She stepped out slowly, clutching her purse like a shield. The years had softened her face, but not her guilt. I met her halfway down the path. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. She looked around at the freshly painted house, the flower beds, the new mailbox with my name. "It looks beautiful," she said. "Better than ever." I nodded. "It feels better too." Linda's eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I've said those words to myself every day, but they don't fix what I broke. I thought about all the years we'd shared before the lies. The holidays, the laughter, the small kindnesses that weren't fake, just tangled up in wrong choices. You can't fix the past," I said gently, "but you can stop carrying it." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and handed me a check. "It's the money Richard put under my name." I closed the account. I pushed it back toward her. "Keep it," I said. "Do something honest with it. Something that matters." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You really forgive me." "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," I said. "It's choosing not to carry someone else's shame." She nodded her shoulders, lowering, as if a weight had finally fallen away. We stood there for a moment, quiet, except for the sound of the lake brushing the shore. After she left, I sat on the porch and watched the light fade. The world didn't look different, but I did. I thought of Richard, of the man he was the one he couldn't be, and the one he tried to be at the end. For the first time, I hoped he'd found peace wherever he was. When the stars came out, I turned off the porch light. The reflection of the lake shimmered in the dark, steady and calm. Tomorrow, the first group of women would arrive for the weekend retreat. I'd planned a simple welcome dinner, soup, bread, and stories. Not about revenge, not anymore, but about survival and grace. Before heading inside, I whispered to the knight to the house, maybe even to him. "You were right, Richard. I am steady. But now I'm free." Winter came early that year. Frost gathered along the porch railings, and the lake froze thin and silver under the December sun. I'd thought the quiet season might bring loneliness, but it didn't. The retreat had become something real. Every weekend, women came, some from nearby towns, some from states away. They stayed in the spare bedrooms, sat by the fire, and told pieces of their lives out loud for the first time. I didn't have to teach them anything. We just listened. There was Janice, who'd lost her husband and found out he'd left their savings to a woman half her age. And Ruth, who'd worked 30 years at the same diner, only to be replaced by a younger manager who called her sweetheart. They came with pain that looked different, but felt the same betrayal wrapped in years of silence. We cooked together, painted old furniture, laughed about things we thought we'd forgotten how to laugh at. I watched them grow lighter day by day, and somehow I did too. One afternoon, I received a letter from Richard's sister, Mary. She thanked me for doing what Richard never had the courage to do, make something good out of all that was broken. Inside the envelope was a photograph. Richard standing by the lake house, holding a hammer, grinning like a man who hadn't yet learned how to lie. It was taken the summer we built the porch together. The picture made me smile. For once, the memory didn't hurt. That evening, I pinned the photo on the bulletin board in the main room next to a hand-painted sign. One of the women had made, "You can't rebuild the same house, but you can build a better one with the same hands." It felt like truth. One night as snow fell softly outside, I found myself sitting alone by the fire with Linda's letter still tucked in a book on the table. I hadn't read it again, but I hadn't thrown it away either. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a series of choices, some louder than others. I took it out, folded it once more, and placed it in a drawer with Richard's final letter. They belonged together now, both pieces of a story that no longer owned me. Around midnight, the wind picked up howling across the frozen lake. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and looked out at the stillness. The stars were bright, the kind of winter sky that makes you believe in second chances. Somewhere in that silence, I whispered a thank you, not to Richard, not to Linda, but to myself. For staying, for surviving, for turning pain into something that mattered. In the months that followed, the retreat became known around the county as the Avery House. Churches sent women there for a weekend of rest. The local newspaper ran a small story titled, "From Betrayal to Belonging." It brought a few curious visitors, but I didn't mind. Every story that walked through the door reminded me that even the deepest wounds could become windows if you let light through them. One spring afternoon, I stood by the lake as the ice finally melted. The air smelled of pine and thawing soil. A breeze brushed my face, and for the first time I didn't feel the weight of memory pressing down. I felt light, free, alive. Inside the house, a few of the women were setting the table for dinner. Laughter filled the kitchen, spilling into the hall. It was the kind of sound that made the world feel right again. I took a deep breath, stepped inside, and joined them. Later that evening, after everyone went to bed, I sat at my desk to write a short note for the next day's meeting. I wrote, "We can't change what people did to us, but we can choose what we build from it." Then I added, "If you've found even a little strength here, share it with someone who's still searching. Tell them they're not alone." When I finished, I looked out the window. The moonlight shimmered across the lake lake that once held my grief, now reflected peace. I smiled. The story had come full circle. Not of revenge, but of redemption. If someone were listening right now, I'd tell them this. Don't let someone else's betrayal become your identity. Let it become your beginning. And if this story reminds you of your own, share it with a friend, with your daughter, or with a stranger who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the story that saves someone else starts with the truth that once broke you.